I think what makes this intergenerational money talk so challenging is that it actually challenges long existing relationship dynamics between parents and children.
Does talking about your money make you cringe? Are you tired of fighting about finances? Do you want to stop sabotaging your financial happiness? Then you are in the right place. Welcome to Breaking Money Silence, a podcast series aimed at helping all of us talk more openly about money. Your host, Kathleen Kingsbury, is a wealth psychology expert who is doing what she does best, speaking about taboo topics. International speaker, author, and founder of KBK Wealth Connection, Kathleen understands money and our relationship with it. Over the past decade, she has empowered thousands of people to break money silence at home and at work. Now, here is Kathleen.
Hi, this is Kathleen Kingsbury, and I want to welcome Blair Baldwin, the founder of AgeUp, to the Breaking Money Silence podcast today. Welcome, Blair.
Oh, thanks, Kathleen, so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to learn more about the research that your firm AgeUp did around millennials and money, and you are kicking off the series on this topic. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say today.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we just did a lot of really interesting research, so hopefully it will give us some good talking points during our conversation.
Absolutely. Before we get into that, about millennials and money specifically, I'm curious. I know you started the company AgeUp, and I would love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about what inspired you to found this company and just, very briefly what it is, so that gives them some context to our conversation.
Yeah, of course, Kathleen. So AgeUp is actually a product, and it's a product that's sold by the Haven Life Insurance Agency, which is a subsidiary of MassMutual. So Haven Life is like MassMutual's in-house startup. And the story of AgeUp really actually begins with a startup that I founded called Quilt that was acquired by MassMutual and Haven Life about 2 years ago. And, MassMutual and Haven Life gave us this really interesting, unique challenge. They said, look, you guys are really good at, product innovation and creating entirely new insurance products. Why don't you take a fresh look at annuities and come up with something just new and different? Nobody's really innovated in the space of annuities. Give it a go. And we were really excited about this open-ended challenge. It helped that in a way that we didn't know anything about annuities, so we had no kind of, pre-existing biases or constraints that were limiting our thinking. But we actually did know quite a bit about life insurance because Quilt, the insurtech that I founded, was one of the early movers in online life insurance. And one of the things that always really interested me about life insurance was the fact that it really is this financial protection product that protects people against one side of the sort of the mortality curve. If you think of, almost like a bell curve of death, like when people die, you buy life insurance because of the small risk that you're going to die earlier than expected, earlier than most people. Sort of the long tail risk protection for stuff on the left side of that sort of bell curve of life. What's really interesting to us, though, is that there was never a financial product protecting folks against the other end of the curve. Namely, like what happens if you actually live much longer than expected? In most ways, this is a great thing, living a very, very long life. However, many people aren't financially prepared for living into their 90s or beyond. And so we took that nugget of insight, really looking at life insurance and flipping it on its head from a product to protect against dying too soon to a product that protects against living longer than expected. And what we ended up doing is taking an annuity product and sort of tweaking it to provide this really long tail longevity protection. And then how this sort of connects back to what we're talking about today is that in the context of this work, what we realized is that this longevity risk problem that we were solving for with AgeUp is something that impacts both, let's call them the super seniors or the that are in their 90s or hundreds. It impacts them directly, but it also impacts their families. Because typically what happens when somebody reaches a really advanced age, they may have already run out of their resources. And usually it's the family, the children that end up sort of jumping in to support their parents. And it's that intergenerational dynamic between the parents and the children that sort of really led us to create AgeUp. And so what we ended up doing is focusing on essentially two generations right now. The baby boomer generation, so people who are in their 60s and 70s, and then their children, which is actually the millennials and the younger sort of slice of Gen Xers. Yeah. And sort of unpacking the dynamic between these two generations, like their attitudes towards finance and retirement savings, and taking that and essentially bringing that to market as a product to protect against longevity. So we just did a really large survey of about 1,500 millennials and younger Gen Xers to ask about their attitudes towards their parents' retirement savings and longevity. And then we actually followed that up with another parallel survey to about 1,500 baby boomers themselves. And so we could get some interesting sort of cross-generational comparisons between the two. But anyway, I'll stop there because I've said a whole lot all at once.
That's okay. So, I know almost half of Americans would rather talk about death, dying, or politics than talk about money. And I also have a sense that hasn't changed for the younger generations. So tell me, Blair, given what you've experienced, what your company AgeUp has researched, do you think millennials still find talking about money taboo?
Absolutely. And one of the places where you could see this is actually in the data. So we asked this question very directly, like how important is it that you talk to your parents about their retirement savings? And the majority of millennials and younger Gen Xers said it was really important. But then you contrast that with the follow-up question, which is how often do you actually talk to your parents about their retirement savings? And there, the answer was not very often. So it turns out that I think 57% of the millennials never or rarely once a year talk to their parents about their finances. And that's a key signal for us that this really is a taboo topic.
Yes, no, absolutely. I'll share a link to the public summary of your research with our listeners, if that's okay with you, Blair, because there's some really interesting stats in there around money silence. And so I think what you're talking about is that disconnect. And I've seen it before between partners. So I do a lot of work around couples or with advisors and their clients of yes, we want to talk about money. But then you ask them, do you actually talk about money? And the answer is well, not really. And so I think that disconnect is what you're seeing with the millennials, and you use this term younger Gen Xers, which I'm a cusper. So I'm an old Gen Xer. Almost a boomer. So it's a little hard for me to hear, but I understand it's the younger Gen Xers that are being impacted.
It's interesting. It's kind of similar to the concept of asking people, should you take your vitamins? And then do you take your vitamins? And there's sort of a disconnect between people knowing that they should do something and then actually doing it. By the way, we actually found something very similar. We asked the question of, should you include your parents in your own financial plan?
Oh, interesting.
81% of those millennials and younger Gen Xers said yes. And then we asked the follow-up question, have you included your parents in your current financial plan? And only 36% had. So you just see this big disconnect between should and do, which we found really interesting.
Yeah, no, I think, certainly as someone who focuses on behavioral change, and it is interesting that we know the right, quote unquote, the right thing to do, but do we do it? And that disconnect for all generations, right? I think that's kind of human nature sometimes. So tell me, with millennials, because I know you asked some interesting questions, what did they worry about the most? When it came to finances, what were their top concerns?
So we really asked the questions around their parents. And so not directly for millennials for their own finances, but what they're worried about their parents. And really the number one concern was their parents outliving their resources. And this was a top concern about 62% of the time. And one of the kind of the interesting little nuggets of insight that came out of this survey and possible explanations for why this might be so is, we asked the question about sort of Social Security, and if millennials thought that Social Security would essentially be a viable source of income for their parents in about 30 years. And I think it was 71% of them said no, hard no, not going to be there for their parents. What's actually really interesting is we asked the same question to the baby boomers in that follow-up survey, and you have the baby boomers much more optimistic about Social Security as a source of retirement income for them. So this is one of the things that we at least hypothesize could be driving some of these differences. It's just the attitudes towards whether the government will be sort of stepping in to help support older people in, say, 30 years' time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just did a podcast interview with Marcia Mentel, who specializes in Social Security and talking about it for women. And so the different perspectives, I mean, I just disclosed I'm a little bit older and she's a boomer, and the different perspectives as to whether it's going to be there, not to fund your entire retirement, but whether it'll even exist. That there's definitely different beliefs depending generation to generation. So that was really, I think, something striking in your survey that, over 70% of millennials said it's not going to be here to help my parents. So that disbelief in the government. So I know this isn't your area of expertise, but I know your product is positioned to help with these conversations, or to help fill the gap, at least in terms of making sure parents have resources, making sure millennials are taking care of their parents. And so the question I want to ask, and it could be your personal opinion if it's, you don't have research on it, is what do you think it is about talking about finances across generations that's so challenging? Like, do you have any sense of that? I mean, you're a dad of 2 young kids, so you're going to be having these conversations someday as well. What do you think, Blair?
So this is a personal opinion, because this isn't something that we research explicitly, but I think what makes this intergenerational money talk so challenging is that it actually challenges long existing relationship dynamics between parents and children. And so if you think about a typical parent-child relationship, it's one where the parent is sort of the provider, sort of the authority figure, and then the child is the sort of dependent on that parent. And that's how your brain is like hardwired from age 0 up until you're an adult. I think what starts to happen with these money conversations is that it starts to alter that existing dynamic. And because it's so ingrained in people's heads, you kind of have a hard time sort of processing it. And it makes it difficult to talk about, because it challenges a way that they're very used to thinking, literally from birth. So that's personal opinion, but I think it's a realistic one to sort of stand behind.
It's interesting because, from my personal life, having taken care of my mother who had Alzheimer's and she passed away over a decade ago. My dad's 89. I had a grandmother who lived to 103, 106. So I certainly have that longevity factor in my family. But really thinking about as someone gets older and they do need care. And I was fortunate in that my dad is very financially prepared. And so we've talked about the money. But in terms of just that flip dynamic, Blair, there is a way in which all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, now I feel like I'm the parent and they're the child. And it is something that is a little awkward. I think for me and for anybody who's listening in, I think the key is to start early and to talk about it often, and to know that it's uncomfortable for most of us. And when I look at your research, I see, it's uncomfortable for many generations. And it isn't just, so that we're all in it together trying to figure this thing called talking about money out. So when you created AgeUp, tell me a little bit again about like your mission, or how this product can help people talk about money or cover their risk around longevity. Maybe just briefly highlight kind of what your thought process is around that and how that product works.
Yeah. So in terms of the product and let's say it like our challenge when we started this whole adventure, the challenge was create a new type of annuity that's accessible and relevant to sort of the vast majority of Americans. So typically annuities, they tend to be very expensive and tend to be sold to a relatively small sliver of the population. And we really wanted to create something that was, for one, digital, that anybody could buy. It was accessible if you just had a computer. 2, that was financially accessible, meaning that an annuity, I think the average annuity sold today is about $100,000. So it's a really large amount of money. We wanted something that would be financially accessible to everybody. So small monthly premiums as low as $25 a month. And we wanted it to be relevant, to actually solve a meaningful problem. And so the product design that we came up with, essentially an annuity that doesn't start paying out until they reach into their 90s, lets you take very small dollar contributions and almost sort of stack the income up over time. And so that when you actually do reach your 90s, it's a really material amount. And it ends up solving this longevity problem, which is more and more people are living into their 90s and beyond, and they're outliving their resources. So it's a nice kind of combination of solving an unmet market need and also creating a really financially accessible product for the masses.
So I've read a little bit about it before this interview. And so one of the things is this is a product for millennials to buy for their parents. Now, how do you do that? Do you like give it to them, for the holidays? Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Here's your insurance in case you live past 90. How does that work, Blair?
Yeah, in a way, this actually connects directly to what you're doing on this podcast, which is it really forces a discussion between adult children and their parents. Because again, when a parent reaches their 90s or beyond, their finances are going to get intermingled with your finances anyway. And so what we're trying to do with this product, essentially solve a problem that may exist, but well in the future. So solve it now in small little bits of $25, $50. And then hopefully in 20 years, we will avert a longer term problem. But what it does is it forces a conversation between the millennial or the younger Gen Xer and their baby boomer parent, and it gives them a way to do that with this new product that's never existed before. And that's our hope, at least. And what we're trying to do is sort of combine this new product design with, frankly, folks like yourself who are preaching the importance of products like these and conversations like these, and we'll hopefully get more people to really work together to make more solid financial plans.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think one of the things that I want to ask before I let the listeners know more about how they can find out about you and AgeUp and look at the product for themselves is, I have a fair amount of financial advisors that listen to this program. And I know as they're sitting out there listening, there's going to be some pushback. I'm not saying all of them, but some of them are going to be like, well, why should I recommend this to my clients? Or, this annuities, that I don't like the word annuities, whatever they might come up with. Like, how have you and AgeUp dealt with that backlash? Or maybe you haven't experienced it yet, but I have a feeling there's going to be a little pushback from the existing financial advising world or the traditional financial advising world.
Yeah, and that's probably a fair expectation because what we're doing is so different. Literally all annuities today are sold through the traditional sort of financial advisor channel. And we're doing something very different. This is all direct to consumer. So anybody can go to the website and purchase it on their own. And in a way, sort of bypass the financial advisor. And so we do expect that may be a little scary and a little unfamiliar for financial advisors. At the same time, we also realize, again, having spent a lot of time talking to people and surveying folks, that they don't make their decisions in a vacuum, and they actually go to their financial advisor for advice. So even if they may read about something online, like a new product like AgeUp, more likely than not, they're actually going to take this product, go back to their financial advisor and ask a few questions, try to suss out whether this is a good idea or not. So the financial advisors are very much part of sort of how we envision the product being sold. It's just not in a traditional way where they're getting a commission and actually walking the client through it and selling it. Does that make sense?
It does. That's actually a really good distinction. It helps me understand, and I'm sure some of my listeners understand. And I think there's so much changing in the financial services industry, and a lot of it for good in terms of, one of the things that I hear that really is heartwarming for me is that AgeUp and what you're trying to do is provide a solution for people who aren't affluent, who don't sometimes fit the minimums of what historically we think someone who has to have to go to a financial advisor. And I know that's shifting and changing in the field with a lot of what's happening with the XY Planning Network and a lot of younger advisors. But I think it's good to think about it. It's not an either or. It's kind of like, here's something that may be of interest to you. Check it out. You may purchase it on your own. You also, if you have an advisor, may want to run it by your advisor and see how it fits with your holistic picture. I think that really serving middle America is something that the industry hasn't done a great job at. So the more we can do that, the better off. I certainly think, coming from a middle-class background, that's a good idea. So where can
Nice.
people find out more about you, Blair, and your company AgeUp? Like if they just wanted to go and I'm going to post a link to the research, but what's the best website or what's the best way to reach out to you?
Just go to age-up.com. So we're a product, we're underwritten by MassMutual. So MassMutual is the parent company of Haven Life, which is the digital distribution. So the digital agency that sells AgeUp. As I said, underwritten by MassMutual, and MassMutual is one of the largest and oldest insurance carriers in the country. And when you go to ageup.com, you can both read all about the product, about sort of this longevity risk that we talked about today, as well as get tips about talking to your parents and family about money and some of these awkward topics. I would be a bad salesman if I didn't mention you could also go through and purchase the product on ageup.com, which you can. But you can also just play around with a calculator and various tools to get a sense for how it works and if it's the right product for you.
Awesome. Well, I have so enjoyed this conversation. I love that AgeUp reached out to the Breaking Money Silence podcast and we got to chat today. And I hope we can have further conversations because I think what you're up to is really interesting.
Oh, thank you so much, Kathleen, for having us on today.
Great. I want everybody to make sure that they check out AgeUp. I will post again all the information on there for you to easily click through. And if you have any questions for Blair or myself about this podcast, feel free to email me at kbk@breakingmoneysilence.com and make sure you subscribe to the podcast and share it with friends using your favorite podcast app. So thanks again, Blair. Have a good rest of your day.
Oh, thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you for listening to Breaking Money Silence, hosted by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, a wealth psychology expert, author, and founder of KBK Wealth Connection. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast app and leave a review. Also, share this episode with your friends and family. It is a great way to get the conversation started. For more money talk tips and information, or to hire Kathleen to speak at your next event, go to www.breakingmoneysilence.com.